As I've gotten older, the importance of games that are easy to pick up and play has become of paramount concern. My personal time is extremely limited, so when I do sit down to relax, it's gotta be something that isn't gonna frustrate me or put me in a bad mood. This doesn't necessarily mean the difficulty has to be easy, but the gameplay needs to be fun and the mechanics second nature. These are what I call comfort games, and I have a list of them for you in this very episode. It's extremely important that you understand that this is not an attempt to make a best of list of any kind. This is a list composed of many genre types and across a number of different console platforms. They are simply games that I love to play and can sit down anytime to do so. The attraction is partly nostalgia, of course, but it also is about just how well made this software was. There's something special with each one of these, and I hope you enjoy the show. My first game was a Saturn juggernaut when it came to graphics and gameplay. Released at the end of 1995, it was one of the games that quickly turned around many people's opinion of what the Saturn could do visually. Running at 704 by 480 and 60 frames per second, I could easily leave this one here because it looks so damn good, but it's so much more than that. Starting a game up, you get to choose from a list of fighters that have very different styles, but are all capable of a similar rhythm and flow. That cadence is the core of Virtua Fighter 2, and the start of getting good at it. The first few battles can easily be handled with simple combos and throws. Once you get to Pi, the difficulty bumps up, and you'll need to learn deeper tactics like hit and run and power moves. The point is that Virtua Fighter 2 is one of those games that is so well designed and paced that it became part of my regular rotation, and I rarely lose my cool with it. It also happens to have one of the best modes a fighting game can have, a watch mode, where you can see how the AI plays with certain fighters and the strategy it uses to defeat them. Even when working, I will throw it on just to have that presentation in my immediate environment. This is one hell of a special fighting game, and I never get tired of it.
Ready, go!
A big theme of this episode is pick up and play appeal. You won't find many games with more of that than Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Sitting down to play this is like spending time with an old friend you are extremely close to. There is nothing more to learn about it, nothing that's gonna surprise me, yet running through this castle, facing these enemies, while soaking up this presentation, man, there's magic in this game. A good platformer is a balancing act of making the movement, jumping, and attacks interact so well with the world around it all. How does that jump feel when it launches and lands? How does that attack feel when it hits or misses the enemies? Symphony was a product that found a perfect relationship between all that. And the funny thing is, that's before you get to the other areas it does so well. The RPG elements, the incredible soundtrack, it all contributes heavily to a game that is almost hypnotic in how it draws you into its world. You never really want to leave it either, and hours can pass just collecting money and looking for that rare item you'd like to have in your inventory. No matter the version, no matter the platform, Symphony is a masterpiece. I first played Street Fighter Alpha in an Aladdin's Castle arcade in Harrisonburg, Virginia. I was so happy to find it because my friends and I were such big fans of the series. The new art style, characters, and music were a big hit with us. When it was announced for the Saturn and showed up soon after, we just had to have it. It was one of those games we played together constantly, learning every move, every fighter, and every mode inside out. We eventually filled the save data with level 8 master playthroughs for everyone, and played it religiously until Alpha 2 was released. Years later, I still find myself returning to this one, however. There was something different about its smaller roster that felt more intimate and well balanced. Its locations weren't flashy, but there was comfort in their familiar settings, such as a small neighborhood store or an empty train yard. It was especially nice to see the fighters return from the first Street Fighter, not to mention a few new faces that felt like they always belonged. The gameplay was distinctly Street Fighter, but the new chain combos were such an easy addition to your arsenal. You could basically chain weak, medium, and strong attacks into anything, giving you easy damage potential for every single fighter, particularly when used with supers. Be sure to get this for the Saturn or PlayStation, because it includes the Masters Rankings, a mode that keeps track of your best play sessions.
Round 2, fight! You win!
When it comes to feel-good software, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is a masterclass of nostalgic goodness. The 16-bit Sonic games already have core mechanics that couldn't be any easier to learn, but once you add in the stage design, music, and visuals of this one, you feel like a teenager every time you play it. It's also one of those games that once you learn the ins and outs, you never forget how to be good at it. The entire thing feels so natural, so second nature. You'll burn up the screen no matter how long you go between play sessions. I'm not the greatest Sonic fan, and I'd even argue the first game has its issues, but for me, Sonic 2 damn near perfected that formula. It was bigger and better in every way possible, and I still really enjoy it now that I'm much older. Sega would introduce newer Sonic titles that would add much more than what we saw here, but you just can't beat the feeling that this one gives you. It's more than simple nostalgia, but nostalgia is an important aspect of it. There's an alchemy at work with how everything comes together and just feels right, just like a Sonic game should be. If you ask a lot of people about what the best Streets of Rage game is, you'll likely hear all about parts 2, 3, and 4. There's not many out there that appreciate the first Streets of Rage the same way, but this game is super special to me. There was something about the locations that really spoke to me in this game. From the neon-lit streets, to the creepy back alleys, to the city-side beaches, Streets 1 was incredibly appealing. I love the way the music fit in so well with what you saw around you. In the back alleys, you could hear the bark of a distant dog. In the factory, you get an almost mechanical chorus with a booming bass that gives you the feeling of being surrounded by heavy machinery. The original didn't have the moves or the visuals of the later games, but it had a unique feel that was honestly missing in those games. This was more personal, more grounded in reality, and it felt like what you'd see if you stepped out in any big city across America. Of course, the nostalgia factor is also sky high for me because I actually got this game right after I mangled my leg playing football. I played it again and again, never tiring of the music, environment, or the great multiplayer. That multiplayer was also some of the first gameplay my youngest sister would enjoy with me regularly, and it was so awesome seeing her skill improve so much. I'm okay with the other games in the series being called better, because in many ways they were, but when it comes to the intangibles, Streets of Rage is in a class all its own. Much like the first Streets of Rage, the original Road Rash on the Genesis is a game I just love to sit down and play often. It's easy to find more features and better graphics in the later games, but the first has such a powerhouse appeal. A lot of that is because of the soundtrack, which is incredibly unique. Rob Hubbard crafted an aural experience here that might be one of the most powerful descriptors of acquired taste I've ever seen. At first it may not meet the ear quite so well. Give it time, however, and it becomes an essential part of this experience. The entire thing screams grunge and teenage fantasy. Essentially, it's a backroads racing league with motorcycles, where there are no rules. Get from A to B any way necessary. That includes beating down your fellow racers and avoiding traffic that can end your dreams in a heartbeat. It's this combination of danger, rocking tunes, and competition that brings me back again and again. I love the twists and the turns of these roads. I'm always interested in what the other racers have to say, especially after I run them into oncoming traffic. Some of you may not find this janky, peculiar sounding relic of a bygone technology all that special, but for me it's a door back to a time when I was young and dumb enough to find something like this feasible. Sometimes a game is so unique, so everlasting in its appeal, that it stays high atop your list of comfort software no matter how many years may pass. That is certainly the case with Pilotwings 64. At first this may seem like the most simple of game titles. It initially appears to just be flying through rings and popping balloons. There's plenty of that to be sure, but it's also a lot more. There's different modes of transportation, some truly weird objectives, and if you like taking pictures, there's an entire section of the game dedicated to it. But it gets better. There's a cannonball target practice that shoots you clear across the map, bird wings to explore at will, and if you can believe it, you can even chase around a giant and launch missiles at him. The appeal here is about variety, the ease of play, and relaxing atmosphere. It's one of the Nintendo 64's most underrated and underappreciated game titles. If there's any such thing as gaming for the soul, this should instantly qualify. Go into it with your expectations in check and just let it guide you gently into this universe. It's the game you play to get away from the stuff you normally play, and it's some of Nintendo's best work. When I was younger, Mike Tyson was dominating the heavyweight boxing division. This dude was knocking out everyone, and when a video game showed up with his name on it, every kid in my school wanted to play it. To most of us, we were playing a kick-ass sports game featuring the heavyweight champion, but in reality, Nintendo had essentially created one of the best action puzzle games ever devised. Going into this, you can't just mash buttons and beat your opponents as quickly as possible. Nearly every fighter has a pattern that must be observed and then timed to perfection in order to defeat them. That there was part of the appeal, and the core gameplay is excellent without a doubt. But it's also a case of the fighters having such memorable personalities and visual traits. This bunch of would-be champions are an unforgettable mix of nationalities, body types, fighting styles, and difficulties. Once you face them, learn their moves, listen to their dialogue, and ultimately score the defeat, you'll never forget a single one of them. This creates a sort of timeless aspect to the appeal, and once you get good, it's a joy every time to work your way to face Kid Dynamite himself. There's a certain tempo to the repetition that always manages to be fun, no matter how many times you play it. It's another one where Nintendo created pure magic, and not even its sequels or follow-ups were ever able to top it. This one will be hard to hear for some of you. There are many good Super Mario games, but when I want to sit down and replay one for the sheer joy and comfort of the experience, I always choose Super Mario Bros. 2, or to be more specific, the US version of the game. When I got this for the NES back in the day, I was shocked by how different it was from the first one. I'll save you the larger history lesson behind it, but Nintendo actually reskinned a Japanese game called Doki Doki Panic here, which is why it's so different. I didn't care at all because no matter what the hell you call it, it's still a really fun game. I love the way you could pick up and toss almost anything in the environment, including the enemies. The worlds felt so alien, not in just how they looked, but in how they were designed. Once you learned it was all a dream, it made total sense. There was also a lot of appeal in the different characters you could use. They all had different abilities to exploit, and that made the replay value skyrocket. That replay value was also bolstered by your typical Mario secrets, like warp zones and different routes to find. It's another one where you don't really argue when someone wants to say other Mario games are better. The appeal here goes far beyond just running and jumping on enemies. It's the complete package of strange worlds, weird enemies, and the various heroes you can choose. I can play it for hours without missing a beat. I remember when I got my Super Nintendo, I fell in love with F-Zero right away. Part of it was because of the Mode 7 visuals, of course. I had never seen anything like this at home. It was so fast and smooth, like the Sega Superscalers you'd find in the arcade. But it was also the gameplay, the different worlds you raced on, the incredible soundtrack, and the spot-on perfect difficulty. F-Zero gives you multiple choices to choose from when it comes to race modes, and how hard those races were to win. Whether you were a beginner or a diehard looking for a challenge, F-Zero was an adjustable masterclass of how to make your game appeal to every gamer type. I also really appreciated how the tracks differed from one another. While many racing games leave it to the track itself to determine the challenge, you also had tracks in F-Zero where the atmosphere and obstacles mattered. The wind shear, magnetized strips, jumps, boost pads, and scrub vehicles made such a difference to the control. You had to adjust to them or end up a pile of rubble. The control was determined by the vehicles you used, each with its own weight, power, and acceleration stats. It was so nice how Nintendo built the gameplay around the controller as well, making the L and R triggers pivotal in properly controlling your vehicle. When I recommend a racing game for the Super Nintendo, I almost always end up throwing this one out there first, because it just feels so good in every area. When I pull out the old PC Engine, I just have to play the legendary Axe. Though the games are totally different, this has a similar appeal as something like Road Rash for the Genesis. The visuals and sound are so distinct to this hardware, it's as feel-good as it gets. at least for me because I played the absolute hell out of it back in the day. I really liked how the gameplay was based on a timing and power system. You just couldn't go in and wail away on the enemy. You had to wait for your bar to be at max power to get the best effect. As you can imagine, this made for a game that could be crazy difficult at times. I didn't mind though. The first few areas were easy, and when it frustrated you enough, you just turned it off to try again another day. It was one of the few games I owned early and really felt like the Genesis couldn't replicate it completely, because it sounded the way it did, and because the color use was so bright and varied. You know me though, this sucker needed some parallax scrolling in those backgrounds, and I bet the Genesis would have been unbeatable in that area. Still, the legendary axe was a staple for me on the TurboGrafx, and the draw is still high all these years later. This game was such a pure product of this hardware, it likely would have looked and sounded completely different anywhere else. You may believe that a game that is notoriously difficult wouldn't be on a list of comfort games. Back in the day, the Revenge of Shinobi certainly did its fair share of sending me into fits of rage, especially that final boss and his devious trap. Over the years, the game became second nature, and now I have no real issue beating it even on its most difficult setting. I've played this title so much that it easily falls into the space where I just love to sit back and relax with it. It of course helps that the game design is so damn good. Nothing here is overly complicated or difficult to understand. You have some up-close melee attacks, and you have a limited supply of throwing knives to hit the bad guys at distance. You have a backup suite of magic to even the odds as well. I love that it felt like you were chasing the evil Neo-Zed across the globe. Each stage moves you to a completely different location, so it never feels rehashed or repetitive. Some of these areas are simple left to right affairs where you deal with the enemies as your main threat. Others are far more vertical in nature, and some even introduce loads of platforming with pit deaths aplenty. It's also incredible how well the boss encounters are done. Nearly every battle here changes up not just how you interact with the enemy, but also the mechanics needed to defeat them. The first boss is a simple mission of attacking the head, but you'll soon be battling supercomputers with protected brains, missile-toting vehicles, and even Spider-Man himself. I just never get tired of it, and though Shinobi 3 improved on a lot of this, it's never lost its appeal or charm. In fact, when it's time to fire up a Shinobi to play for fun, it's almost always this one. Arcade racing games have a certain magic to them. They aren't really based on reality in any meaningful way, and they often value speed over everything else. Outrun 2 fits into that description well, but the draw to this one goes well beyond. The visuals alone make it worth recommending because they are drop-dead gorgeous. A powerful mix of buttery smooth performance and stunning detail. You'll have a hard time believing this sucker originally released in the arcade way back in 2003, 20 plus years ago. You'll also love the soundtrack, which remixes the classic tunes while giving us some extra Sega cheesiness to drive to. But for everything this game does so well with its presentation, the gameplay is what keeps you coming back again and again. This one keeps you in a near constant state of power sliding, letting up only briefly here and there. It's so incredibly easy to enter a power slide too, little more than tapping the brake and turning hard into the direction you want to go. A quick counter steer will pull you back, or you can effortlessly pull into a power slide the opposite direction. All of that affects your speed little, and that's the entire point. Keep that speed up without crashing into other cars or terrain beside the road. Its setup is classic outrun style where you can choose your route at various junctions. Those routes are typically based on some famous attraction or landscape, and you'll want to try every single one to see them all. When it comes to the joy of driving, I don't think Sega made another game that felt this good to control. It's more than a video game, it's arcade crack that will string your ass out for life. I couldn't do an honest list like this and not put Dragon Force on it. This was a strategy RPG for the Saturn that would become one of my favorite games of all time. Since we have gone over this game before, I'll spare you the tutorial of how to play it, and just say no other game on this list, and few games beyond it, have the playability and possibilities you'll see here. You can play this entirely how you want to achieve what the game ultimately wants you to do. You can use any of the available troop types. You can conquer the map any way you feel. You can use the main characters of the story, or you can use the generals you turn to your calls. The short of it is that it makes for an insane amount of replayability, the kind that makes this a must for a list like this. The best part is that half the time I'm just doing things to see how they work. Can I beat a full army of dragons with a mage army only 40 strong? Can I take a castle of 10 generals with a raiding party of only 5? I know the game so well, the normal strategies to win have become, I dare say, too easy. Now I want a challenge, and when you pair that with this game's open-ended nature, it's alchemy on an enchanting scale. This goes much further beyond just a feel-good title for me. It's the best Sega Saturn game ever made, and quite frankly, there's never been anything else like it. While I have no special interest in professional golf, video games based on the sport have been a love of mine since the 8-bit days. When Neo Turf Masters appeared for the Neo Geo, I found something that I could play tirelessly. At first the mechanics seem incredibly simple, and they are. A meter determines how hard you hit the ball and an arrow points the direction you want to go. But you can also put a spin on the ball that can dramatically affect its trajectory. Learning where and when to use it turns this simple game into one of the best titles of the genre. It's also really nice looking with loads of color and details all around the course. You always know where you want the ball to be and where things can go terribly wrong. Your choice in character also plays a big role in things. Some are all about power while others are more about finesse. The difficulty is also perfect. Play it on easy and there's nothing really keeping you from an easy day on the course and you're guaranteed to shoot well. Jack things up a bit and it quickly becomes a game where the smallest of errors can cost you heavily. All of that gels into a highly pick-up and playable golf game, whether you are highly skilled or just a beginner looking for a relaxing getaway. Neo Turf Masters is arcade gaming perfection.
Player 1, second shot. On the green. Player 1, birdie try.
Birdie! I did it!
Our last game is one that will no doubt surprise many of you. It's far newer than most of the other games on this list, and it's quite divisive when it comes to being compared to other titles in the same series. Metal Gear Solid 5 was such a strange game for me because part of me absolutely hated the setup. The story felt so half-assed, and the base building parts never held my interest beyond doing the bare minimum. Hell, in all honesty, I didn't have a clue what was going on half the time. What did make sense and what did click with me was the perfect gameplay. I would drop into a map and just run around for hours, silently taking down outposts, bases, and vehicles 100 different ways. Sometimes I'd go in quiet, bleed the enemy dry, and walk out without so much as a bullet fired. Other times I'd go in heavy weapons blazing, explosions rocking the environment, and driving away full speed as reinforcements overwhelmed me. The choice was unreal with the amount of different weapons and ways you could handle things. Back when it was originally released, I stopped caring about the story and other elements, and just wanted to immerse myself in this world's combat possibilities. That has persisted all these years later. When I play this, I don't go in for anything more than a few hours of testing different strategies. Can I take out an area of the map with just my hands? Can I drop the entire enemy encampment with traps set up around their position? Konami had something special with this gameplay, and it's the best this series ever offered. If only the story had lived up to the same excellence.
Не дождусь. Ну ладно, хорош. Увидимся.
The funny thing about the episode you just watched is the idea actually came up while I was playing one of these games. I hadn't played it in a while, and I just wanted to sit back and bathe myself in the feeling of being back in 1996 when it landed on my Saturn. And that's really the strength in all of these releases. Not only are they excellent games to begin with, but they also captured a moment in my life that makes them unforgettable. While we covered some of my favorites in this regard, there are still many more I could add to a part 2. I've been gaming for some 40 years now, and I have many more that would fit into the comfort zone. While on the subject, I would love to hear what games you consider as feel-good software. What memories do they bring up? What era of your life do you drift back to when playing them? Let me know down in the comments what you think. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.